Now, before we start, we all know what the big news today is all around the world. So just, entirely on a personal level, I would like to offer my condolences to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the death of her husband, HRH, the Duke of Edinburgh. So, having said that, folks, let's move on to something that actually affects all of us, and intriguingly, but not intentionally, today's topic deals with the whole issue of government and how you look like you're in charge when you're not, when you're a scammer. So if you've seen on Twitter, you'll notice that that's how I advertised this week. I took a stock photo of the Palace of Westminster. The tower on the far right, by the way, that's what people often call that Big Ben. That's Elizabeth Tower. Big Ben's the base bell, the hour bell of the clock. I think the clock is just, by the way, this is an entirely an aside, is simply called the clock in the Elizabeth Tower. But you can see that makes that picture look very official, even though it's just a picture of a public building that's taken by a photographer from the river. So that looks quite sort of interesting, exciting, and dramatic. So it's no surprise, particularly given the coronavirus pandemic, that crooks are using official government communications for stuff that the government expects us to deal with and we're interested in dealing with. For example, are you scheduled for a vaccine yet? Things that we know we'd like to find out electronically so we don't have to go and mix with people, where the government wants to be able to communicate with us at 1p per SMS rather than spending, say, 60, 70 or 80p sending every household in the country a letter. So we're used to the idea that the government is trying to use electronic means to contact us, and given that a lot of us are in lockdown or even shielding or isolated, means that we're relying on messages that come from outside. Now, we've spoken many times on Naked Security before about other sorts of business-oriented scams. And of course, the really obvious one that kicked off almost as soon as the coronavirus lockdown started, certainly in the UK, and I think many countries in the world are seeing exactly these scams. More and more people suddenly using home deliveries who hadn't used them before, getting stuff that hadn't been correct, that desperate for getting those deliveries. Maybe they weren't even allowed out because they were required to isolate, so they're relying on a delivery, say, to get food to their house. So when they get messages that say, hey, your delivery's delayed, you can imagine that that's the kind of thing that the crooks love to jump in on. So here's a recent example. This was sent in, I think, just today by our Naked Security reader. There's an example. This is a little different. This is imagining to be one from overseas. It says, you see that the sender actually came up as the text string Royal Mail. Now, I don't know how, if you're using Royal Mail as your delivery company, or DHL or UPS or whatever it might be. I don't know what you should expect in the UK as the sender number or the sender ID, but as we all probably know really well, that name or the number that comes up is not handled securely. So it's quite possible for crooks to spoof the name that comes up. As you see there, that didn't come from Royal Mail. It just came from a number that identified itself with that string. And it said, you have to pay a customs fee of 2.70. Please pay via blah, 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 pay immediately to avoid delays. Now, I have imported stuff from overseas where I didn't expect to pay duty. And when the parcel was on the way and I was expecting it, I have had a message just like this from a legitimate courier company. In my case, it wasn't actually Royal Mail, saying there is an amount to pay. Until you pay it, we can't release this. You either have to show up somewhere and pay it, or here's a link to the website where you can go and pay it. And I did have to pay the money, and only when I did could I go and collect the item. So although this is unrealistic, and although there are some nice errors that the crooks have fortunately made, this kind of thing is not entirely unusual. Yet, we all know about home delivery scams. We've written about them loads of times on Naked Security, so we're all primed for them. The problem comes, as I said, what about when crooks are trying to, if you like, appeal to even higher authority? So we've seen coronavirus scams where they're pretending to be, this is a missive from the World Health Organization. This is some official document that you need to read, stuff coming in by email. And as you're all probably aware, it's really easy to make something look much more official than it is, given the limitations of websites, of text messages, and so on. So, for example, I took that original image and I took all the text off it. So there's that. It's a gorgeous picture of the Palace of Westminster from across the River Thames. But suddenly, that looks much more official than it really looks sort of like, hey, this probably has something to do with government. In your country, you can replace the building that most represents your sort of country's federal government. For example, in Australia, it might be the Parliament House, whichever, a very iconic image, or the US Capitol, or the White House, or whatever it might be. So it's really easy to make a website. That's just a stock image that I purchased from anybody can easily purchase. And of course, I can go one better. If I'm in the UK, I could just, and there you see, that doesn't just look like the gov.uk logo, it is the gov.uk logo, and where it says realistic look and feel, that text is in. I simply used my browser to create this after going to the real page. That is in fact the genuine government font because it's served up on their website. So I simply changed the text. It said I forget what the text was. I edited the HTML and up came realistic look and feel. That is it's actually the font is called Transport, or it's a modified version of Transport, famously designed in the 1960s, I believe, by Margaret Calvert, OBE, who was one of the people who redesigned the UK's road signs to make them all lovely and beautiful looking. I adore that font because it doesn't have a purely vertical L, you can't confuse it with an I, but it looks right because it is right. And the crooks, it's easy for the crooks. They can simply go to the real site, copy the HTML, copy the style sheets, copy the JavaScript, copy the logo files, and make their site look exactly the same. It's very, very difficult. In fact, it's effectively impossible to stop someone making a clone of something that looks like your site. It won't be on your domain, it won't be on your domain name, it won't have your web certificate, but just for how it looks, it's really easy to create something that passes muster, like I did there. That literally took me 2 minutes to do. In fact, if you want to make your site look like gov.uk, gov.uk itself has a site that helps you to do that. It doesn't want every government department looking different. So actually, if you want to be on gov.uk, you have to make your site look like theirs. And there's even a web page that will absolutely help you to do that. So the problem is that the fact that it looks right is really, really easy for the crooks. And the fact that it's not just a company, it is, in the UK's case, Her Majesty's government. It's very easy for the crooks to get a sort of believability that years and years ago with printed material would have been much harder to do well. So here's a recent example of a government-related scam. We wrote this up on Naked Security. You may have seen the article. If you want to view it, just go to nakedsecurity.sophos.com and search for the word census. A few weeks ago, Sunday, March the 21st, 2021, was Census Day, at least in England and Wales, and that it's mandatory to participate for each household to participate in the census in the UK every 10 years. You're not allowed to skip it, and there genuinely is the possibility of getting a £1,000 fine if you refuse to participate. So when you get a message like that just looks like a sort of official looking message, and government department messages often just start with name of department : and then some text. This is saying there are some mistakes or missing stuff in your census application, strange word, and some punctuation mistakes there, go to that link. Now the good news is the link doesn't look anything like census.gov.uk, which you ought to know is the link in the UK because you probably received something through your letterbox which had a magic code for you to register, which would have had that domain written on it. But the problem is that everything about this seems reasonable. Yes, the government may contact you by SMS. Yes, those SMSs will be short and sharp and sweet and in very simple English. And they won't say dear so-and-so because there isn't enough space. And anyway, it's the census. They don't know your name. They simply want you to complete. Yes, you could get fined £1,000. So everything here seems reasonable. And if you were to click on that link without thinking about it, like I said, the site that you would go to, remember how I copied the gov.uk part, that's the Census 21 page. And now, interestingly, they're not using the Transport font on that page. They must have got a letter from their mum or something to let them off. But look at the fake versus the real. They don't just look similar, apart from the bit where the real census page says, put in the magic code we mailed you, which of course the crooks don't know. The crooks want to just edited the text to say, put in your postcode, which is a normal way of identifying your household in the UK. People are quite used to that. Our postcodes generally deal with, say, about 10 different addresses. So it doesn't just look close because the crooks have gone out of their way to copy it. They've simply cloned the site and edited one lot of text. So if you ignore the URL at the top, then it actually looks pixel perfect. And that's a real problem because it comes via an SMS that doesn't look a million miles away from the way that government departments might contact you. For example, this is a real message. As far as I know, it was sent to every mobile phone subscriber in the UK. Her Majesty's government, I believe, is exempt from the telephone preference register, or do not call as it's known in other countries. They're allowed to contact everybody, because my number's definitely off that list, but I, along with just about everyone else with a UK phone number, received a message like that. You can see from the date, or if you can read it, it's almost just over a year ago, coronavirus alert, and new rules in force now, you must stay at home, more info and exemptions. Now, there is a link in there encouraging you to click it. Fortunately, in the UK, most government or many government pages are gov.uk, and that domain is quite jealously guarded. So it's very hard for the crooks to get some kind of subdomain. They'd actually have to hack a server. They can't just go out and buy a domain something.gov.uk like they can go out and buy whatever they want.com. But the point is that at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, you might say that the government kind of softened everyone up to the idea, well, you can expect SMS messages and they'll start with some capital letters that tell you what it's about. So with that in mind, you can see that that fake census message, although it's got some grammatical and punctuation mistakes in and a weird link, it's not entirely out of the question. And you saw that in the UK Gov case, their messaging system sent it with a caller ID of UK_gov, and as we saw, the fake message that we had yesterday from the reader from Royal Mail said Royal Mail with no spaces. So the crooks are perfectly able to inject reasonable looking text, or just to use a local number, which will look like a local number because it is a local number. So with that in mind, that was with the government having contacted people before, it's perhaps not surprising to think that you might get an SMS like that. And the government has said now that it may contact you, or your doctor's surgery might contact you. NHS is our National Health Service, saying, right, you've come up, you're on the list for vaccination now. Because it goes by age and medical risk and so forth. So to book your appointment, click here. And a lot of people are waiting for those as the age limit keeps going down. More and more people are waiting. I want to get my turn. I'm going to book up. And so it's not unreasonable that you might get a message like that. I've blanked out the number there, but you might not know what to expect. And if you were to click through again, then you'll find that the page may very well look like a legitimate NHS site. So the point is that giving their messages and their websites that veneer of government correctness in almost any country of the world is really easy, because what used to be the government seal and the king's ring or whatever, that it's signet ring that are used for signing stuff, and it was very hard to make exact copies. These days, unfortunately, and effectively by design, it's kind of trivial. So what can we do about it? 3 quick tips, and then I shall finish. Well, the first thing, as we say every time, is if you get something that contains a link and it's a scam, that link almost always is a giveaway that you're not going to the right place. It's possible that the crooks might hack census.gov.uk, but it's much less likely than that they will simply get a sound alike or a domain name that kind of is believable enough that maybe ends .com or .info or .mobile or something that they can buy. So the link is very, very often a dead giveaway in phishing. So if you look at it and it doesn't look right and you don't recognize it, just don't go there. You know that you can delete and move on. The second thing is that in all the examples that I showed you, except the official government one, where they obviously took great care, the crooks, fortunately, they might not always do this, they did make a mistake. And if you are fluent or reasonably fluent in English, those mistakes are usually quite obvious. It might be a spelling mistake, some weird grammar, or they don't quite get the word right as you would use it in your country. And it could be as simple as something like, for example, somebody trying to scam Australians and sending them a message that talked about a government organisation and put the letter Z in it instead of an S. If the crooks make a mistake like that, because in Australian English, organisation in government departments is always spelt with an S, never with a Z. So if the crooks make a mistake like that, which they don't have to, but if they do, make them pay for it because they've given themselves away immediately. So like every carpenter or joiner will tell you, measure twice, cut once. Don't be in too much of a hurry. But my third tip is in many ways the simplest and by far the most effective. And it is basically what we say every time we talk about scams like this. When you get a message that says you're ready, you're eligible for vaccine, you can book. When you get something that says your home delivery was delayed, click here. When you get something that says there was a problem with your census submission, go back in and check the questions you missed or whatever it is, because it is possible actually in the census in the UK, you can complete the the page by mistake without actually answering all the mandatory questions. You can leave them blank. So it's not entirely unreasonable that you might get something, oh, we spotted a mistake, like some answer that needs to be there. You can go back in and correct it. It's not entirely unreasonable or impossible. But so let's say that in all of those cases, those messages, the census, the NHS, the Royal Mail delivery that I showed you today, let's say that all of those had been legitimate. Well, it would have been very convenient to click the link because it typically jumps you right into, for a home delivery, it means you don't have to type in a reference number again. It saves you a few seconds. Even on a mobile phone, it doesn't save you that much, however. It might save you 30 seconds of your life. But if you go, there's a message, what I'll do is I'll go to the real site. So when you know that you're expecting a delivery, for example, from royalmail.com, and that is their domain, it's a private company, a public company now, not a government body. So make sure that you know where that site is before you get messages from anyone telling you something different. For example, Royal Mail, it's very easy. I found it with some very simple searching, and if I had ordered something from them, I would know this page because they would have told me before any crooks did. There's a page where you can track and trace your own parcels. The only disadvantage in time over clicking a link that they might send you is that you have to re-enter your reference number. So you're starting from the beginning. So those links in messages, yes, they're convenient. You click them, they got some magic code in there, they jump you straight into the right part in the website. But if you never click those links, then even though it means sometimes you don't click the right ones, it also means you never ever click the wrong ones. So for example, if you're thinking, well, I'm about at the age level, I'm about expecting to notification about my coronavirus vaccine and you're waiting for that, then if you get something that has a link in it, ignore it. There's a standard page that you can find easily on, and that's nhs.uk, not nhs.gov.uk, by the way, for NHS, if you are in Britain. They actually have a standardized page where you can book and manage your vaccination, and it has a button on it that starts the process. So you don't need to click a link in order to get somewhere, because after all, some people don't have mobile phones, and this system is designed that it will work whether you were notified by email, by SMS, by voice, by just meeting your GP who said, yep, you're up, go to the website, or by you receiving a snail mail letter in the post. So the point is, if you know that you're expecting a message about your vaccination, work out where that page is yourself and visit it yourself. And the last one, exactly the same with the census. When you, in the UK, you'll get a letter first, generally to the household, because it's the household that completes the census, although each person can do it individually. But the household gets a letter, and the letter has the URL written in it. It will be very, very hard for the crooks who are sending the SMS to go back in time and change the URL on the printed sheet that dropped through your letterbox a week before. So figure out the page, and if you get anything that says there's anything going wrong with the census or whatever it might be, you know where to start. So very, very briefly, just going back through those 3 tips about how to avoid message-based scammers, particularly text message scammers, where the messages are short and there's less space for the crooks to make a mistake. It works for ones that are for regular companies, but particularly important, particularly in the pandemic, with people expecting communications from the government with that sort of sense of officialdom and the sense of, well, the crooks would never have made it look quite so right. Tip number 1, check the link. A lot of fishes absolutely give themselves away in the link. Not all of them, but if the crooks have put in a link that just doesn't add up, then it's really, really simple. Do not click it. You're going to put yourself in harm's way. The second thing is, if the crooks make a mistake, if there's a spelling mistake, or if they get the currency wrong, or if you live in the UK and they write the date in the wrong format, they put the month first instead of the month second, for example, then assume that it means that somebody made a mistake because they didn't know what they're doing. Make the crooks pay for it. They don't have to make those mistakes. So do not rely on the fact that if it reads perfectly correctly and there are no spelling mistakes, that does not mean that it's legitimate. But it does mean that if there is a mistake that shouldn't be there, that a government correspondence would not have made, then it means you know right away. And lastly, and most importantly, although I know it's less convenient, just don't click links in messages that say you're up for vaccine, you need to do your census, here's a home delivery, your tax return's late or whatever. Go back to the site where you know you went before to do the tax return, to book your vaccination in the first place, to submit your first version of the census, to get your booking to book your courier delivery in the first place. Go back to the page the way that you know where you're starting from. And if you never click those links, then very simply put, you can never go wrong. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hope to see you again next week. And until next time, stay secure.